The year was 2014, and I had recently gotten a PS4. At the time, while the PS4 was selling extremely well, there weren't really that many exciting games to play on it. Games like Watch Dogs and Destiny sold well, but they weren't the critically acclaimed hits that people were looking for. But there was something the PS4 did get in 2014 that was really well received. But it wasn't a game, instead it was a demo. At the time, I was sort of new to the gaming scene. I was hearing people on the internet talking about a demo for some game franchise I wasn't familiar with, and that was from some random game developer that I guessed was pretty famous. Not that I cared. Being that this demo was trending at the time and that it was free to play, I decided to download it and try it out. And what I got with this demo was an experience I'd never gotten before with any game ever. There was no combat, no hub, there's no way to defend yourself, period. All you did was essentially walk around this hallway repeatedly while also going through a bunch of rooms and looking at stuff. On paper, this demo sounds really boring, and yet it was one of the scariest, most tense things I'd played through at the time. Now, I'll be honest, I actually got stuck towards the end of a demo, and because of how scared I was playing it, I actually didn't finish the whole thing, and yet the experience playing this demo had stayed with me ever since. This demo was called PT, or Playable Teaser for short, and it was a demo for the cancelled game Silent Hills, and it was from none other than Hideo Kojima.
Hello everyone, I'm back.
Hideo Kojima. If you're into gaming, you probably know who he is. He's the guy responsible for the Metal Gear Solid games and the Death Stranding games, as well as some other games that you probably aren't too familiar with, like Snatcher and Police Knots. Hideo Kojima is one of the biggest gaming icons, if not the biggest. Sure, people like Neil Druckmann and Sam Lake are big, but neither of them are on the level of Kojima. Like, neither of them have studios named after them. I mean, could you imagine a studio named Naughty Druckmann or Remedy Lake? I certainly couldn't. Kojima is just on an entirely different tier of status. He's a true gaming icon, the likes of which we haven't seen before, and to be honest, I don't think we'll ever get a man quite like Kojima ever again, or a developer that'll impact the industry in quite the same way that Kojima has. To put it in simple terms, I believe there will never be another Hideo Kojima.
Oh yeah.
I think we could really see just how different Kojima was all the way back into 80s and 90s. In 1987, Kojima wrote and directed Metal Gear for the MSX. This game was really unique for its time because most games back then were action-based. Contra, Mega Man, Ninja Gaiden, all these games had action-based combat. Metal Gear was different though. It punished players for direct combat and instead rewarded playing stealthily. Resources like health and ammo were limited, which forced you to try to sneak past enemies rather than fighting them head on. And Metal Gear introduced alert-based features when you got caught. Features that would be used in franchises like Assassin's Creed and Hitman. But it was more than just that. Most games back then had a fantasy or sci-fi setting. Metal Gear instead was based in the real world, which made it much more grounded than other games out at the time. Most games back then had really basic stories, like go rescue the princess from Bowser, or defeat the evil scientist. Great stuff, I know. But in Metal Gear, Kojima dealt with serious themes like the fear of nuclear weapons and rogue nations and war. The game had some big plot twists that you just wouldn't see in games back then. Kojima was already doing back then what few developers dared to do with their games, but Kojima would top himself in a massive way in 1998 with the third Metal Gear game, Metal Gear Solid. This game was revolutionary back when it came out, and it redefined what video games were capable of doing. Metal Gear Solid was arguably the first video game that managed to give people a true Hollywood cinematic experience. Games like Final Fantasy VII had some really epic pre-rendered cutscenes, but the in-game cutscenes all have these static fixed angles. Not to mention Final Fantasy VII didn't have any voice acting. In fact, most games during the PS1 era had really static cutscenes along with minimal voice acting, if any. Like, just take a look at this cutscene from Resident Evil. Like, what is this?
It's dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
This cutscene doesn't feel very cinematic now, does it? Now look at Metal Gear Solid.
Who are you?
I like you. I have no name. That exoskeleton.
Metal Gear Solid is filled with these movie-like cutscenes. These cutscenes have close-ups and zoom-ins and dramatic angles. And on top of all of that, these cutscenes are all in-game, which helps to make them feel more seamless of the gameplay. Unlike other games that rely on pre-rendered cutscenes, which makes the cutscenes feel more separate from the gameplay. And unlike most voice acting that you would typically see in a PS1 game, the voice acting in Metal Gear Solid was actually phenomenal. Metal Gear Solid just in general gave players a really excellent narrative that actually rivaled the best movies and TV shows, and it paved the way for the story-focused games that we'd eventually get later on. Just in general, Metal Gear Solid was a really big, epic, playable film, and it was amazing. The topic of film is really interesting when it comes to Kojima, because while he is an iconic game designer, Kojima has always been passionate about film, like really passionate about film. In fact, he says in his social media bios that 70% of his body is made of movies. He's even said that he tries to watch a movie a day. This man loves movies more than almost anything else. Kojima actually originally wanted to be a movie director, not a video game designer. While he was a kid, he and his family would watch a movie together each night. European cinema, westerns, samurai, horror. They watch a lot of different types of movies, and when Kojima was in university, he was initially trying to find a way to get into film production. The point is, Kojima likes film a lot. And I think he's always tried incorporating a lot of film-esque elements into his games. His games feature long, complex cinematic cutscenes. In fact, Metal Gear Solid 4 has the world record for the longest cutscene of any video game in history, with the ending cutscene being 71 minutes long. To put that into perspective, that cutscene alone is only 10 minutes shorter than the first Toy Story movie. I mean, what other director would throw in an unskippable cutscene that long? It is true that Kojima later on would break up cutscenes with more gameplay, kinda similar to a Naughty Dog game, but Kojima's cutscenes would actually begin to resemble Hollywood films even more. Metal Gear Solid 5 honestly has some of the most incredible cinematography that I've ever seen in a game, and I think one of the reasons why is that the cutscenes in MGS5 have very few camera cuts, similar to films from Alfred Hitchcock and Stanley Kubrick. The opening for MGS5 Ground Zeroes doesn't have a single camera cut, similar to the Alfonso Cuarón film Children of Men. MGS5 has lens flares and camera shakes and focus pulls. MGS5 even has film grain, which helps to make it feel more gritty and authentic. And the Hollywood feel of Kojima's games doesn't just end with the composition of scenes and their cinematography. Kojima uses a lot of licensed music in his games. Death Stranding had tracks from Low Roar, Silent Poets, Churches, and Apocalyptica, and the song that plays during the Phantom Pain prologue is Midgar Yuri's cover of The Man Who Sold the World. Kojima's also worked with a lot of incredibly well-known film directors and actors from Hollywood. Norman Reedus, Guillermo del Toro, Kiefer Sutherland. I actually looked up on ChatGPT what games had the highest number of Hollywood actors, and it turns out that Death Stranding, out of all the games possible, was at the top of the list, with 7+ A-listers. But what's interesting is that Death Stranding doesn't feel mainstream at all. Unlike other narrative-based games that feel relatively grounded, with plots that still feel relatively normal, Death Stranding is a really weird game with a crazy story that feels more like an obscure art house film than your typical blockbuster. It's the type of game that on paper isn't something that a mainstream audience would necessarily like, but that's just the thing of Kojima. Kojima doesn't just stick to doing what works or what he knows people will like. Quite the opposite, honestly. Death Stranding 2 apparently had playtests that were so good that he decided to make big changes to the game, because if players like Death Stranding too much, that would be a problem. What other game director would do something like this? Kojima is not afraid to go bold, no matter how polarizing it is. Metal Gear Solid was such a big hit. All Kojima really had to do with Metal Gear Solid 2 was just give people another game where they play as Snake and go on another espionage mission, but no. Instead he decided to make you play most of the game as Raiden, who is almost nothing like Snake. Whether you like this decision or not, it was undeniably a bold choice, one that we're still talking about to this day. And even as people beg Kojima for another game where you got to play as Snake, Kojima didn't really give people that either. Kojima made you play as Big Boss for Metal Gear Solid 3, and for Metal Gear Solid 4, the game when you finally get to play as Solid Snake, you don't actually play as the Snake that you remembered from Metal Gear Solid 1, and instead you play as a much older and withered Snake. So even even in situations where Kojima gives you what you want, he doesn't give it to you in quite the way that you would expect. And to me, that just shows why he's an auteur, because he never just takes the safe route and goes with what works. Instead, he's always making interesting decisions with his games that make them feel unique. Kojima games in general can be very weird. Kojima often includes odd story elements, bizarre mechanics, insane characters, and moments that are just crazy.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
The mission is a failure. Cut the power right now.
What's wrong with you?
Don't worry, it's a game. It's a game just like usual.
You'll ruin your eyes playing so close to the TV.
What are you talking about?
Raiden, something happened to me last Thursday when I was driving home. I had a couple of miles to go. I looked up and saw a glowing orange object in the sky to the east. It was moving very irregularly. Suddenly, there was intense light all around me, and when I came to, I was home. What do you think happened to me?
I think part of the reason it works is that while his games have a lot of zaniness, they also explore a lot of mature themes and still have a lot of very powerful and emotional moments that I still think about. I think all of these offbeat moments help to make his games entertaining and prevent them from getting too serious to the point where you can't have fun with them anymore. Don't get me wrong, his style definitely isn't for everyone, but whether you like Kojima's work or not, there's no denying that he puts a lot of passion into his games and that his games have a lot of heart, which is something I can't say about a lot of games that come out nowadays. The thing about Kojima is that he rose to prominence as a developer during the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. The gaming industry has changed so much since then. The industry itself wasn't nearly as big and as corporatized. Games back then had far smaller teams and budgets. A small team, of course, allows for a developer's voice to actually shine. Metal Gear Solid had a team of just 20 people, and so you felt Kojima's voice in that game. A lot of modern day AAA games are made by hundreds, if not thousands of people. With development team sizes that big, it's no wonder that most games now lack that personal touch that a lot of older games had. And so his games all felt interesting and unique. Smaller budgets also means that games don't need to sell millions of copies in order to make a return on investment. So developers are more free to take risks and try new ideas that might seem more wacky or out there. I think this really worked in Kojima's favor, letting him try a lot of his more experimental ideas. And because Kojima's games were successes, it gave him credibility to then work with higher budgets as game development costs increased. I feel like had Kojima just started working as a game developer today, his games probably wouldn't have had the same level of creativity that they did. Just in general, Kojima was at the right place and at the right time for his games to actually make a difference and stand out. And I think you could say the same about a lot of other auteurs. George Lucas made Star Wars back in the 1970s when there was almost nothing like it in existence. No movie back then could even come close to having visual effects on par with Star Wars, or offering spectacle at the scale of that movie. Nowadays though, there are countless movies that have incredible effects, and there's a seemingly endless amount of movies that offer massive spectacle. If George Lucas made Star Wars today, Star Wars would be just another blockbuster movie, and George Lucas wouldn't be known as the auteur that he is. Instead, he would be just another filmmaker. George Lucas became what he was because he made something at that point in time that had never been conceived before. Star Wars was unlike anything that had ever been made. And that ties into another point about why there will never be another Hideo Kojima again. Kojima made highly cinematic games in a time when those type of games didn't really exist. But today we have games like Uncharted 4, Red Dead Redemption 2, and The Last of Us Part 2, games that are arguably more cinematic than most movies are. Metal Gear Solid was a revolutionary game specifically because it came out in 1998 and on the PS1. If Metal Gear Solid had been released today with modern day graphics and on modern day consoles, there's a good chance it'd be well received, but would it have been viewed as a revolutionary game that it was? Probably not. Nowadays, while we still do get games that push the medium forward, it feels like it's tougher to get something truly revolutionary, especially when we've already gotten a lot of the big leaps. It's really hard to make a game that feels light years ahead of other games in terms of visuals when we already have so many games that look very realistic, like Alan Wake 2 or Horizon Forbidden West. It's really difficult to make an open world game that feels mind-blowing when it comes to scope when we've already gotten massive open world games like The Witcher 3, Skyrim, and GTA 5? When so many of the big leaps have already been made, it becomes that much more impossible for a new artist or designer to come in and make something that's truly mind-blowing. I brought up George Lucas earlier. George Lucas is an interesting person to compare to Kojima, because when thinking about Kojima, I think a lot about Lucas. Even though both of these people seem super different on paper, Kojima being a game designer and Lucas being a filmmaker, but I think these two have a lot in common. Both of them are auteurs whose style you can feel in their works. Both have explored really intellectual themes. Both have changed their industries forever. Both of them have written their fair share of clunky dialogue.
I don't like sand.
And both also have earlier works that are beloved, and later works that are more divisive. In Lucas's case, American Graffiti and the original Star Wars trilogy were really well liked, but of course the Star Wars prequels were much more divisive. In Kojima's case, Metal Gear Solids 1 to 3 were all pretty well liked, even if 2 was a bit more divisive at release. But Metal Gear Solids 4 and 5 and the first Death Stranding were all more polarizing, even if they weren't as divisive as the prequels were. To me, both of these men were bold, pushing boundaries, never just playing it safe, pushing out insane ideas, making their vision regardless of what others might say or want. And of course that meant that sometimes they took things too far, and that they didn't always stick the landing when it came to executing their ideas. But at the same time, I think there's something really interesting watching someone make the thing that they want to make, with no one telling them no, with no one to hold them back. Their work will always be fascinating to look at and examine, which is something that you can't say about a lot of other movies or games. And of course, they'll always be remembered as visionaries that had a lasting impact on their respective industries. I look at the new Death Stranding games and I find it almost surreal that Kojima even got to make those games, especially in this era of gaming that we're in. Most AAA games that come out nowadays are familiar or are derivative of something that you've already seen before, and it feels like they're made to appeal to as many people as possible and of course to maximize profit. Games nowadays feel much more safe and risk averse, which is what makes the Death Stranding game such a miracle. After Kojima's fallout with Konami, Kojima essentially got a blank check from Sony to make whatever he wanted. He got complete creative control of basically no one telling him what to do or what not to do. So many modern day games just feel like they're following the trends. Meanwhile, Death Stranding doesn't try to chase what's trending or popular. The game is a slow-paced walking simulator with an absolutely crazy story. So much about Death Stranding on paper seems absolutely unappealing to the mainstream market, and yet Kojima got millions of dollars to fund the game. Sony gave him access to the state-of-the-art Decima engine, which has been used by Guerrilla Games to make the absolutely gorgeous Horizon games. Kojima got tons of famous Hollywood actors, and not to mention all these celebrity cameos. He got all of this to make an art house game. No other developer would be able to get access to this many resources, this many famous actors, this amount of creative control, all to make a game like this. And I think that makes Kojima one of a kind. Initially, I got the idea for this video by reading this brief snippet of an interview that Kojima gave with GQ to promote Death Stranding 2. I'll put a link to this interview in the description because it's really worth reading. Kojima was basically asked about passing his baton to someone else, and how he wanted himself to be remembered when he passed it on. Kojima responded by saying, "I'm not gonna pass the baton to anyone. I will rather crush the baton. I don't need to give Hideo Kojima to anyone. If I pass the baton to my staff and tell them to make things the same way I do, the company will not succeed and will go out of business." Kojima would then go on to say, "Every day if I tweet something that I like, a director or an actor or a musician contacts me. They say, I'm a creator because of your games. But they didn't receive the baton of Hideo Kojima. They received my small fire. They're not copying me. They're not trying to be me. They have this fire and they light up their own. And they'll probably give that to someone else. There were legendary comic book artists when I was a boy. I didn't become a comic book artist. I was inspired by them. I was influenced." Just like Kojima took the small fire of other visionaries to become the iconic game designer that he is. Other visionaries are taking Kojima's fire to make something of their own. There will never be another Kojima again, but that isn't a bad thing. There will always be new artists and auteurs in the future that will make their own unique impact. These people will be inspired by Kojima and will use Kojima's work to make their own games, their own movies, their own music, and I think that's incredible. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I plan to make videos more frequently now, so hopefully that means no more year-long waits in between videos. If you enjoyed this video, liking it, commenting on it, subscribing to the channel, clicking the notification bell, all that really helps me out and it's something I would really appreciate. Hope you have a great day and stay awesome.